I was halfway through replacing the oil filter in my truck when my sister, Janessa, came flying into my driveway with her hazard lights blinking and tears in her eyes. She barely threw the car in park before jumping out, and I could already see the damage from where I stood. All 4 tires on her Honda were slashed clean through. One was practically peeled open like a grapefruit. What the hell happened? I asked, wiping my hands on a rag and jogging over. The HOA, she choked out. That crazy woman Judith Wilkins said I was parked wrong yesterday when I stayed over. I came out this morning and found this. I looked closer. The tires weren't just deflated, they were ruined. Deep, deliberate slashes. No way this was an accident or road debris. Someone did this with a blade. Did you call the cops? They said they'll send someone, but you know how it is around here. HOA acts like they're the police. That was true. Ever since Judith Wilkins took over as HOA president 2 years ago, this place had felt less like a neighborhood and more like a dictatorship. Judith was in her 50s, always had that stiff bob haircut and a pair of sunglasses on like she was guarding state secrets. She walked the sidewalks like she owned them, clipboard in hand, sniffing for violations. Last month she fined a guy for having a visibly dusty garage window. A week before that, she tried to have someone's mailbox removed because it wasn't HOA-approved beige. I clenched my jaw. Let me guess. You parked facing the wrong direction on the street, didn't you? Janessa nodded. I was tired, it was late. I just pulled up in front of your house. Technically, our HOA had some nonsense rule about street parking. Something about preserving the uniform look of the neighborhood. But that rule wasn't in the city code. It was just something Judith made up and bullied people into obeying. And now she or someone under her direction had slashed Janessa's tires. Oh, I'm not letting this go, I said, already pulling out my phone. They picked the wrong guy this time. See, I'm not just some weekend grease monkey. My name's Hayes Johnson, and I used to work in municipal code enforcement for the city before I got tired of the office politics. Now I run my own handyman business and know exactly where HOAs overstep their bounds. And I had a friend, Judge Merrick, who owed me a favor. But first, I wanted proof. By the time the police finally came and took a report slowly, like they were afraid of stepping on the HOA's toes, I was already reviewing footage from my security cameras. I'd installed them a year ago after Judith tried to fine me for unauthorized porch furniture, a bench my wife had made by hand. The feed from 2 a.m. was crystal clear. A figure in a reflective vest crouched next to Janessa's car. Then another. 2 people, both wearing hooded sweatshirts and gloves. One of them had a long object in hand, something shiny. And then the unmistakable motion. Stab, slash, stab again. All 4 tires, one by one. I zoomed in on their faces. One of them turned toward my garage light for a split second. It was Judith. Her sunglasses were hanging from the neck of her shirt. Her face was smug, focused. The other person beside her? Her husband, Ron. Portly guy, always following her around like a beaten dog. Got you, I whispered. I burned the footage onto a USB and started making calls. First, I sent a copy to the detective handling the case. Then I called Judge Merrick. He answered on the second ring. Hayes? You calling about the HOA? You bet I am. You remember Judith Wilkins? Oh, the clipboard queen? What's she done now? Put a fine on your bird feeder. She slashed my sister's tires. Got it on camera. There was silence for a beat. Then a chuckle. You're not joking. Nope. And I'm pretty sure she's been doing this kind of thing for a while. I need your help to shut her down. He didn't hesitate. Send me everything. I'll get the city attorney involved. You've got enough for criminal vandalism at the very least. By the time the sun went down, I had a plan. I wasn't just going after Judith for vandalism. I was going after the entire HOA. See, their charter required a vote every 3 years to remain active. That vote never happened. And without that, they were operating without legal authority. They'd been collecting dues illegally, enforcing rules they had no right to, fining people for things that weren't even violations. I printed out the charter, the city code, and a list of complaints I'd gathered over the last 6 months from neighbors who were too scared to speak up until now. Janessa, still shaking, sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea. Are you sure this will work? Oh, it'll work, I said. I'm not just going to expose her. I'm going to dismantle her little kingdom. 2 days later, I called for an emergency community meeting. I posted flyers. I went door to door. I even offered sandwiches. People came. 37 neighbors packed into my garage, curious and buzzing. Judith showed up uninvited, of course, acting like she still controlled the air we breathed. "I wasn't notified of this meeting," she said, arms crossed, lips pinched. "You weren't invited?" I replied. She snorted. "This isn't an official HOA-sanctioned event. You can't hold meetings without board approval." "Ah, but you're not a board anymore," I said, holding up a copy of their expired charter. "Your authority lapsed when you failed to hold the mandatory renewal vote last year." "Everything you've done since then? Illegitimate." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Judith's face went from smug to pale. "That's ridiculous." "No, what's ridiculous is slashing my sister's tires over a made-up parking rule. Want to see the footage?" I pulled up the video on the mounted TV in the garage. The room went dead silent as the clip played. There was no mistaking her face. Or her husband's. Judith tried to step forward, but nobody moved aside for her. For once, she didn't look in control. She looked cornered. People began murmuring. Then someone shouted, "That's criminal. You can't just slash tires." Another voice, "You fined me for a garden gnome, Judith." "A garden gnome?" I turned to the crowd. "I've already sent this footage to the police. And the judge. The HOA is done. You've all been bullied long enough." Judith tried to speak, but Ron grabbed her arm. "Let's go," he muttered. For once, she listened. They left without another word. But this wasn't over. The real hammer was still coming. 3 days after the footage aired in my garage, Judith Wilkins was arrested on her front lawn while watering her geraniums. 2 cruisers rolled up quietly, and she barely had time to set down her watering can before they read her rights. Her husband tried to intervene, muttering something about misunderstandings and neighborhood enforcement, but the officers brushed him aside. I watched from across the street with folded arms. The same neighbors she'd bullied into silence for years stood behind me, whispering, some recording. None offered to defend her. Not this time. After Judith was driven away, the real storm began. It turned out she hadn't just crossed the line with my sister's tires, she'd practically set up shop on the other side of legality. Once the footage became public record, Judge Merrick ordered a full audit of the HOA's finances. That's when the city's legal department uncovered something far worse than rule violations or expired charters. Nearly $30,000 in unaccounted dues. Over 18 months of financial records missing. Bank statements showing transfers to a personal account under Judith's name. And checks written to consultants no one had ever met. I got the call from Merrick while I was under a client's kitchen sink fixing a busted disposal. "She's being charged with embezzlement, Hayes," he said, "and wire fraud. Her husband, too. Looks like they used association funds to pay off personal credit cards." I had to lie on the floor for a minute and let that sink in. So this whole time she was threatening people over mailbox colors while stealing from them? Exactly. And given how she used her position to commit a violent act, the DA's stacking the charges. Felony vandalism, misappropriation of funds, criminal impersonation of a city official. If it sticks, she'll be out of commission for a long time. I pushed myself up and rinsed my hands. What about the HOA itself? It's finished. The city's dissolving it. Without a legal vote to renew its authority, it was never valid. The financial crimes just sealed the coffin. You'll get an official notice by week's end. By the time I got back home, a buzz was spreading around the neighborhood. Local reporters had caught wind of the arrest, and a crew from Channel 7 parked at the cul-de-sac entrance. People who hadn't spoken to me in years were now knocking on my door, thanking me, asking what came next. That night, I hosted a second meeting. This time, not in my garage. We used the old church down the road. Since the community center had been closed for renovations months ago, a closure we now suspected had more to do with Judith not wanting anyone to organize without her approval. Inside the hall, folding chairs filled fast. Over 50 people showed up. Some brought their teenage kids. A few brought baked goods. It had the energy of a rebellion that had finally broken free. At the front, I stood behind a podium someone had dragged from the storage closet. "We're not here to replace the HOA," I said. "We're here to make sure nothing like this ever happens again." A man in the front row, Robert, the plumber who'd once been fined for having a work van parked at his home overnight, raised a hand. "How do we stop another power-hungry weasel from taking over?" I pointed to the stack of petitions on the table next to me. "We start by petitioning the city to designate our neighborhood as self-governing. That means no HOA, no board, no dues. Just the city's regular ordinances and services. We handle disputes like adults, not through fines. A woman in the back, Lena, who'd been warned for having a pride flag in her yard, stood up. What about the money they took? Are we just supposed to eat that? No, I said. If they're convicted, the court can order restitution. But it's not just about that. We're going to sue. Every homeowner here who paid illegal dues has grounds for a class action lawsuit. I've already spoken to a legal team. They're ready to move. The room stirred with excitement. An older couple near the side wall exchanged glances. The husband spoke. We thought we were alone. Like we were the only ones who felt trapped. You weren't alone, I said. You were just divided. And that's how they kept control. But not anymore. After the meeting, people lingered. Conversations broke out between neighbors who hadn't spoken in years. Kids played in the aisles. For the first time since I moved in, the place felt like a real community. The following morning, I got a call from Detective Alvarez, who had taken over the investigation after the vandalism report. We've got a warrant to search the Wilkins house, she said. You might want to be there when we go in. There's a good chance more evidence turns up. I arrived as plainclothes officers were already combing through the Wilkins two-story colonial. The front door hung open, and boxes were being carried out. Inside, the place looked more like a records room than a home. Cabinets full of binders. File drawers labeled violations, fines, complaints. All meticulously organized in Judith's sharp cursive. One officer handed me a manila folder. Inside were printed screenshots of my social media posts, dated and annotated. Comments highlighted. Photos circled in red ink. She was keeping tabs on you, Alvarez said. And others too, it seems. I flipped through more pages. There were surveillance photos of Robert's van, Lena's flag, even Janessa's car from the night she parked outside my place. She had cameras set up on her second floor, Alvarez added. Pointed at half the neighborhood. Unregistered. Illegal under state code. Another officer stepped out from the upstairs hallway. We found a safe. Took some effort, but we cracked it. Inside the safe were cash envelopes labeled with initials. Jewelry still in boxes. And a burner phone loaded with text logs between Judith and someone listed only as C. Alvarez scrolled through the messages and raised an eyebrow. Looks like she was paying someone to report violations on demand. Might have been a neighbor. Let me guess, I said. Carl from the corner lot? The guy who used to brag about keeping order. She didn't answer, but I could see it in her expression. That was going to be another thread to pull. By the end of the week, 3 more HOA board members were under investigation. 2 of them had quietly resigned months earlier, but their names were all over the bank statements. The last one, a woman named Patrice, fled the state the day after Judith's arrest. The city posted the official notice dissolving the HOA on every mailbox. It was over, but we weren't done. The class action lawsuit was filed. 42 homeowners signed on. The legal team prepared to go after not just Judith and Ron, but the local HOA management company that had rubber-stamped everything without oversight. Meanwhile, the neighborhood transformed. Yards that had long been muted and uniform suddenly bloomed with personality. Flags of all kinds went up. A teenager painted a mural on her backyard fence, a vibrant, defiant explosion of color. No one said a word against it. We organized a block party. First in years. I grilled ribs. Someone brought a dunk tank. Kids ran through sprinklers. We toasted to freedom, to justice, and to the kind of neighborhood that didn't need a tyrant with a clipboard to keep it together. My sister finally parked outside my house again last night. Properly, improperly, it didn't matter. No slashed tires. No threats. Just peace. And as for Judith? She's awaiting trial. The charges are stacking higher than her old binders ever did. Her attorney tried to argue she was protecting property values. The judge laughed. Literally laughed in court. Turns out, no one's above the law. Not even self-appointed neighborhood overlords. By the time July rolled around, you couldn't walk down our street without seeing someone repainting a fence, putting up a basketball hoop, or finally planting the kind of flowers they liked instead of the ones listed in the approved flora. Pamphlet Judith used to hand out. The air just felt different, lighter. We'd taken back our neighborhood, and people were proud of it. But something still didn't sit right with me. Everything we'd uncovered so far, embezzlement, vandalism, wire fraud, was enough to bury Judith and her cronies legally. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more beneath the surface. Something deeper. Something worse. Then I got a call from Lena. I think you should come by, she said, her voice low. I found something in the old HOA Dropbox. It was still active, And I remembered the login Judith gave me back when I was on the events committee. I downloaded everything. I drove over that afternoon. Lena met me at the door holding a flash drive. Her hands trembled slightly. She led me to her dining room, where her laptop was open and a dozen folders were visible on the screen. Each one was labeled with a resident's name. She clicked on the one labeled M. Grayson. Inside were scanned documents, bank statements, property tax bills, even a medical invoice from a specialist clinic in another state. She was collecting private data, I said, barely above a whisper. Not just collecting, Lena said. She was using it. She opened a Word file named Priority Action Grayson. The document detailed a plan to push Marcus Grayson, a retired veteran, into foreclosure by stacking fines and issuing code violations until he couldn't pay his mortgage. The reason? Property consistently below HOA visual standards. Potential threat to long-term value of surrounding homes. I stared at the screen, my mouth dry. This is targeted harassment. Lena nodded. And look at this. She opened another folder labeled C. Mathers. Inside was an email exchange between Judith and a financial officer at a credit union. The officer had flagged a suspicious wire transfer from the HOA account into a shell company account registered under a fake LLC, Ridgeview Development Holdings. None of us ever approved a development fund, Lena said. Judith created it herself. And then she started moving money into it. Quietly. Over months. This wasn't just theft. She was setting up for something else. I copied everything onto my own drive and left immediately. I stopped only once at the end of the street, where Marcus Grayson was watering his front garden. He waved, and I waved back, trying not to let him see how furious I was. Back home, I sent the entire archive to Detective Alvarez. She called within the hour. "You need to come down here," she said. Now, when I arrived at the precinct, I was led to a small conference room where Alvarez and two men in suits were waiting. One introduced himself as Agent Brooks with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. The other, Special Agent Leland from Homeland Security Investigations. "Your HOA president wasn't just embezzling," Brooks said. "She was laundering money through fake real estate companies. Funds were moved through multiple LLCs tied to offshore accounts." Leland added, "Some of those accounts are connected to known shell operations used in housing market fraud schemes. We've been tracking one of them for over a year. We didn't expect it to lead back to a suburban HOA." I leaned forward. "You're saying Judith was part of a larger network?" "At the very least, she was being used by one," Brooks said. "She had access to regular income from dues, the ability to impose fines, and no external oversight. Perfect conditions for quiet financial funneling." "And the data collection?" I asked. "She was building profiles," Leland said, "targeting vulnerable homeowners, people on the brink of default. Then, through fabricated fines and pressure, pushing them into foreclosure." "And who do you think bought those properties at auction?" My stomach sank. "Ridgeview Development Holdings," I said. Brooks nodded. "And from there, the homes were flipped, refinanced, or left vacant to drive up neighboring prices. It's classic artificial inflation. But using HOA authority as the hammer? That's new. It wasn't just about Judith anymore. She was a cog in a bigger scheme. A willing one, but still just a part. The agents moved fast. Within 72 hours, unmarked vehicles rolled into the neighborhood. Computers were seized. Multiple homes were searched. Carl, the neighbor who used to brag about enforcing order, was arrested at dawn. Turns out he'd been paid to report on residents who were likely to default, feeding Judith names and getting a cut from every flipped house. The most disturbing discovery came from a storage unit registered in Ron Wilkins' name. Inside were boxes of documents, some dating back 5 years. Not just about our neighborhood, but others. HOA bylaws, resident profiles, old financial records from similar subdivisions in nearby counties. "She's done this before," Alvarez told me. "Or someone has. Your HOA wasn't the first test site." The city council held an emergency session. A public hearing was called. I was asked to testify. The chamber was packed. Reporters filled the back rows. Residents from our neighborhood and others affected by similar HOAs came forward, telling stories of intimidation, coercion, and sudden foreclosures that didn't make sense until now. When it was my turn, I stepped up to the microphone and looked out at the room. "I'm not a politician," I started. "I'm not a lawyer. I'm just a guy who changed his sister's tires and decided enough was enough. What happened in our neighborhood wasn't just one bad apple. It was a system designed to exploit people who didn't know they were being watched, manipulated, and robbed. But we figured it out, and we fought back. And now, we're asking you to make sure this never happens again." That night, the council passed a motion to audit every HOA in the county. Several were immediately suspended pending investigation. Back in our neighborhood, things kept changing. The playground that Judith had once tried to have removed, claiming it was non-compliant with community aesthetics, was rebuilt with new equipment, funded by donations. Retired residents volunteered to repaint mailboxes and help elderly neighbors with yard work. Instead of fines, people offered help. And Marcus Grayson? We all pitched in to cover the back taxes Judith's fake fines had cost. He kept his house. He started walking his dog twice a day again, waving to every car that passed. As for me, I got a call one afternoon from a woman named Meredith Langston. She was a city council member in a neighboring district and wanted to talk. "We're reviewing our HOA oversight policies," she said. "We heard what you did. We want you to help us draft new legislation." "I'm just a handyman," I said. "Exactly. That's why people will listen." I met with her the following week. Then again. Then with the city attorney's office. Before I knew it, I was chairing a task force on HOA accountability. Funny how life spins. Judith's trial began in late September. She pled not guilty. The mountain of evidence said otherwise. Her attorney tried to claim she was pressured, manipulated by outside forces. But the prosecution had her emails, her bank records, and the testimony of residents she tried to evict. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty. She was sentenced to 12 years, with no chance of parole for the first 6. Ron got 5 years. Carl took a plea deal, 3 years probation and a lifetime ban from serving on any neighborhood board. The Ridgeview Development Holdings account was frozen. Several of the homes they'd acquired were returned to the original owners or sold to cover restitution. The neighborhood, once strangled by fear and fake rules, had become something better. A place where people watched out for each other, not through surveillance, but with kindness. With intention. I still fix things for a living. But now, I also sit on a city oversight committee. I help other neighborhoods spot the signs early. I teach people how to read their HOA bylaws and recognize red flags. Because what happened to us can't happen again. It started with slashed tires. It ended with a broken system being rebuilt. From the ground up. By the time the trial ended, you'd think the neighborhood would have settled into a quiet rhythm. But the aftermath of dismantling a corrupt institution doesn't just fade with a gavel strike. It ripples. It exposes the things people had buried: grudges, guilt, and in some cases, secrets that had nothing to do with Judith Wilkins but had grown in the soil she poisoned. The first sign that the dust hadn't fully settled came when I got a visit from a woman I barely knew, Nora Dempsey, who lived on the far end of the block in one of the few rental properties the HOA never liked to admit existed. She was in her late 20s, worked nights at the hospital, and kept to herself. Her house was small, no frills. The HOA had fined her 3 times for things like excessive shade from her tree and non-conforming trash bin placement, whatever that meant. She stepped onto my porch one evening just as I was locking up my truck. "I need to show you something," she said. Inside her house, she pulled a shoebox from a crawl space under the stairs. It was filled with unopened letters, each one stamped with the HOA's now-defunct seal and marked confidential. She had never opened them out of fear. Judith had warned her, early on, that disputing fines could result in escalation, a word that apparently carried weight when whispered in the right tone. I opened the top envelope carefully. Inside was a letter I hadn't seen before, one that didn't match the standard fine template. This one was a demand. It stated that unless Nora paid a compliance bond of $700 within 30 days, her lease agreement would be flagged with the county recorder's office. Not her landlord's. Hers. I read the next one. It accused her of violating personal conduct standards by returning home in scrub stained with potential biohazards and threatened to involve county health officials. The letter had no legal citation. Just a signature, Judith Wilkins, President. Judith knew my schedule, Nora said. She knew when I worked. I caught her sitting in her car outside my house twice. I thought I was being paranoid. I flipped through the rest of the letters. Not one of them had gone through the landlord. All addressed to Nora directly. And all designed to intimidate. Did she ever follow through on any of these? Nora hesitated. One time, a man from the county assessor's office came by. Said there was a pending review on the property. A week later, my landlord called me and said he was considering selling because the taxes had jumped. Almost like someone wanted me out. I copied everything, then told her to lock the originals in a safe place. If Judith's campaign had extended to renters, it meant her power trip wasn't just about control, it was about removal. Targeted, methodical removal of anyone who didn't fit the aesthetic she wanted. The next day, I met with Special Agent Leland again, this time at the county records office. He had been following a new lead, one that traced back to a document found in Judith's storage unit. It listed a series of properties flagged for strategic acquisition. Nora's rental was on the list. Judith had help, Leland said, flipping through a binder. There's a name that keeps coming up. Evan Rusk. Ever heard of him? No. He's a real estate consultant. Operates under different LLCs. We ran a background check, 18 shell companies in 4 states. He's bought more than 30 homes in the last 2 years, all through HOA foreclosures or distressed sales. A dozen of those homes came from 3 HOAs that are now under audit. And let me guess, Judith was one of his contacts. Bingo. Emails, wire transfers, even a dinner receipt from a steakhouse downtown. She listed it as a board meeting on her expense report. So what happens now? We're building a conspiracy case. RICO level. If we can prove Judith, Evan, and others coordinated to force people out of their homes for profit, we've got racketeering. I didn't know whether to feel vindicated or sick. That night, I called a few of the people who'd been hit hardest over the years. Not the ones who'd shown up to meetings or waved signs, but the quiet ones. The ones who'd mowed their lawns twice a week out of fear, paid every fine without question, and never parked on the street again after a single warning. One of them was Mr. O'Hara, a retired machinist who lived 2 doors down from me. He'd once had a grandson stay over for the summer, and Judith fined him for unauthorized occupants. He opened the door cautiously, but relaxed when he saw me. I heard about Nora, he said before I could say anything. She's a good kid. She is, I said. And she wasn't the only one. We've got a name now, Evan Rusk. He's tied to this. And the feds are going after him. O'Hara leaned against the doorframe. It's funny. I used to think Judith was just a bitter woman with too much time on her hands. But this was a business to her. It was more than that. It was an empire built on silence. And we were tearing it down brick by brick. 2 weeks later, the FBI executed a multi-state raid. Evan Rusk was arrested at a luxury condo in Miami. They seized 3 laptops, 2 phones, and a safe containing over $100,000 in cash. The same day, indictments were unsealed against 6 other individuals, all board members or HOA consultants from other subdivisions. Their scheme: identify vulnerable homeowners, stack violations, and pressure sales. Then flip the homes through shell companies. Judith's charges were expanded to include conspiracy to commit fraud, obstruction of justice, and violating fair housing laws. Her attorney tried to negotiate, but the evidence was too overwhelming. In a final twist, it turned out the HOA management company that had worked with Judith, Clearview Property Partners, had falsified annual meeting records for 3 consecutive years. They'd forged signatures, backdated board votes, and even created fake minutes to make it look like residents had approved new rules. The state launched a full investigation. Clearview folded within a month. By autumn, the county passed a new ordinance requiring all HOAs to submit annual audits and undergo third-party oversight. Any HOA caught violating the policy would be dissolved by default. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. I was asked to speak at the ordinance signing. I stood behind the podium, looking out at a crowd that now included mayors, council members, and residents from neighborhoods I'd never visited. I told them about Nora, about Marcus, about every person who had been silenced with paperwork and threats. We thought we were just dealing with a bad neighbor, I said. But what we found was a system that let people like her thrive. That ends now. After the event, Nora approached me with a quiet smile. She handed me a small envelope. Inside was a photo. My sister's old car, parked perfectly straight in front of my house. The timestamp was from the night it all started. I turned it over. Sometimes the smallest things make the biggest cracks, she'd written. She was right. What began with a slashed tire had pulled the thread on something far bigger. A network of greed disguised as neighborly order. A machine that fed on fear and silence. But we'd broken it. And in its place, we'd built something stronger, not just a better neighborhood, but a warning to every clipboard tyrant and shady consultant hiding behind bylaws and signatures. We weren't afraid anymore. And we weren't going anywhere.